Our next session is, well, what we're hoping to have is a global panel discussion. So when we were putting the programme for this event together, we kind of got to a point of we've got a great list of speakers, we're really excited about that, and then had the realisation that actually everyone was speaking fundamentally from a UK perspective there, and we thought it would be really appropriate in this event to involve the voices of people who are not based in the UK. So we've put together this global panel to try and get some different international perspectives on biosciences education. So I'll be honest, this is the bit of the event that has made me most nervous of trying to put it together, of trying to get people aligned. And I really hope that this works well. So we have a great list of speakers who are joining us on Zoom, hopefully in a minute. So we have Professor Helen Kwanashie, I haven't said that right, from the National Open University of Nigeria. We have Dr. Jane Austen from the University of the West Indies. We have Maryam Rafiqi, who was until recently based in Morocco. We were hoping to have Dr. Natasha Manvaneri from the University of Zimbabwe. She's unfortunately having internet issues. She's not had any internet issues in her town for the last 48 hours, so she won't be able to join us. But Yusra, who was here yesterday and is joining us online, has kindly agreed to step in because Yusra brings a lot of international experience with her. So we're delighted to have these as our panel members. So if we could just switch to the Zoom there. So hopefully we have all of those people online. I can see some of them. Nice to see you. I can see Yusra, I can see Shane, I can see Helen. Is Maryam there? Maryam's signed in. Brilliant. So what I thought you would do is first of all just get our speakers to just introduce themselves a little bit, to just sort of introduce where they're based, the sorts of teaching that they do, the sorts of students that they're interacting with. And then we've got some suggested questions, but also we can have questions from the room. So it'd be really great to get that experience from multiple different international perspectives of how is bioscience working in other places, what are the challenges, and how important is this decolonisation, diversification sort of thought process, how is that impacting in other parts of the world? So that's my hope for the next session. So if we start with Helen, would you like to introduce yourself to the room, to talk a little bit about your context before we get some questions going?
Hello, everybody. My name is Helen Kwanashie. I'm a professor of pharmacology and a guidance counselor from the National Open University of Nigeria, Abuja, Nigeria. And I would like to thank Catherine and her team for inviting me. It's been a whole learning experience since yesterday. Now, the students I've been teaching in the last 40 years, medical students, pharmacy students, nursing, and biomedical students in general, at both undergraduate and postgraduate level. Although in my current job, most of my students are Bachelor of Nursing Science students. I also teach pharmacology and supervise projects for public health. So that's me. I have an interest in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I identified a lot with what we have been discussing. And if I have your permission, I would like to share one slide to summarize my thoughts.
Go for it.
Okay, regarding the global perspective I'm bringing from Nigeria and the West African sub-region. Let's see, if I'm not permitted to share, I've sent the slide. Oh, here it is. Thank you. Now, this slide
That's great, we can see it.
I would like to make my opening statement with this slide, which shows equality versus equity, because I see that most of what we are discussing surrounds that. And let's assume that this is not a football pitch. This is the bioscience education section. And here, where we're talking about equality, you can see that resources and opportunities available to these three groups of people are equal. But because of the differences, inherent differences in their situation and environment, in which, for example, this can represent the West or the global North, and this can represent the South or the colonized entity, that not all of them will get the opportunity to participate. Whereas if we go to equity, whereby resources are provided according to needs, then you will see that everybody gets a chance to participate. And I think in summary, this is what we've been driving out since yesterday. I put this slide there because I didn't want to think about a field. And this tells us that this is a book and this is other learning resources. And really, equality doesn't achieve much, whereas equity does. I say this because I grew up in an era where people talked about equality in different ways, gender equality, equality in the workplace, but equality is really not fair. And what we should be driving at is equity. Now, this is the last slide of the last segment. So I feel that this is where we are right now. This is our reality. The social and the economic and other capitals that we bring to bear when we talk about bioscience education, and not just bioscience education, in other spheres of life, is really not good enough. You know, some have it all and others don't. And as a result, people don't have a fair playing ground. And therefore, the output and the achievement is different. Equality was good in the 50s and 60s, but some may be able to make it, but not others. So even equality is not good enough. And what we should be striving at as we attempt to decolonize and diversify our curriculum and our teaching environment as a whole is equity, whereby people are given according to their needs. And in fact, we should go beyond this and go towards liberation, where there are no hurdles, no barriers. I know this sounds like an utopia, but perhaps it is futuristic and feasible. So I would say that decolonization and diversification of education in general can help to take us to where we need to be. I think I will stop sharing at this point. That's me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. That's also one of my favorite slides. I use that quite a lot. So that's great. So Shane, if you'd like to introduce yourself. I don't know what time in the morning it is for you, Shane.
Hi, morning. It's still pretty early in the morning. It's like 7 a.m., but it's fine. Hi, everyone. I'm Shane Austin. I'm a lecturer in biochemistry at the University of the West Indies in Barbados. I've been lecturing for the past 5 years, so I'm still quite new, I guess, to the field. But my particular interest is in biochemistry, so I lecture across all of our year levels in biochemistry, starting from level 1, students who are introductory students fresh out of A level, right up to level 3, which would be the advanced students probably getting ready to find something in the world of work or graduate studies. I also supervise some graduate students at our university in the area of biochemistry as well. My interest is also in diversity work, education work as well. I think broader outreach. So all OED activities tend to excite me because I have a passion for ensuring that, you know, the science that we are doing in the lab, it gets communicated to people, because without that communication and without that reaching people in a way that everybody can understand, it kind of loses its purpose and people don't understand why science is important and why these investigations are important. And I've just found that as I did more and more outreach work, the elements of diversity and inclusion started to become more and more important, sort of seeing where gaps existed and where divides persisted. It became like really clear the more I did outreach work, the more where these gaps were, the kind of both in science, but also in communicating science. So that's part of why I also started to get more and more involved in equity and inclusion work, because I thought that it's really important to make science a more inclusive and representative environment of the world we live in, and also to ensure that the people who consume our science are more representative of the world we live in. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shane. Maryam, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you for all the organizing team. I couldn't enjoy more these 2 days, really, learning more than contributing with anything. So I'm a plant pathologist. I just finished my contract. I've been working at the University of Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco. I've been working for over 20 years in Europe, and it's the first time I worked in Africa. I worked mostly in Morocco, but also in Ghana, where I spent some time interacting with scientists from 5 different universities and research centers throughout Ghana. So I just find Africa is home to some of the most abundant biodiversity resources on the planet, and home to some very talented, intelligent scientists in the field of bioscience, as we talk about. Colonialism or decolonialism is something that we usually don't talk much about in different parts of Africa. Perhaps South Africa and other few other countries are a little bit more advanced in this conversation, but not so much where I have been, at least. But this doesn't mean that once you reflect on the things we have talked about, you can realize and you can sense all those impacts that are still impacting, all those factors that are still impacting the progress of science in general and bioscience in particular in Africa. I think there is, to my feeling, there's a high number, an increasing number of African scientists and students that are ready to move away from this scientific absolutism and greenwashing, and unlock new ways of thinking, that they're ready to engage in a free way of thinking and challenge and see the world and see the knowledge we have inherited with different eyes, if you like, and contribute to progress as well. The only thing I wish we have this conversation we had today and yesterday during this symposium. I wish we could expand this conversation to include African students and scientists, and see how we can engage in a more collaborative effort that will benefit everyone, of course, without allowing science to be targeted for some kind of maneuvering. There's always this intellectual. Sorry, that was my battery running low, but I think I've taken enough minutes. I'm very happy to dwell into different factors that are affecting the teaching of bioscience in Africa, if there is any interest from the audience out there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maryam. And then Yusra, if you'd like to introduce yourself. So there's some people who were not online yesterday who didn't meet you yesterday. So Yusra, if you'd like to introduce yourself and a little bit about where the different countries that you've worked in and your experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, again, and hi, everyone. Today I am online, back to Derby. So yes, I'm still located in UK time zone. So I'm based in Derby, but I do, as I mentioned yesterday to who were there and listened to my talk, that I do have that kind of background because I've traveled a lot luckily or unluckily, I find now I would like to settle down in one place, and I call UK home. But I've had my primary education in UAE, and then I moved on back to Pakistan. So where I was part of doing my undergraduate and master's in Pakistan. I went off to do my PhD in UK, moved on to do a postdoc in Singapore, and then worked in Poland. But within that, the thing that I didn't mention yesterday was that I also had some etchy experience teaching biotechnology after my PhD in Pakistan. So that's where my teaching career started. And I worked as a module leader for a couple of years in Pakistan, and I brought that knowledge up for my position here at Derby. Also within that bit, there was another bit being very restless. And during the pandemic, while I was looking for jobs, I established my own company, which is a tutoring company, which basically tutors, it's a private online tutoring company, which talks about etchy teaching. And I have a team of tutors that I work with. And we work with UK etchy students, and we have also Middle East and a couple of other countries as well that we cover. So I think that kind of experience and working with those kind of students and my own experience of working within those sectors is what I would like to bring in today to talk about the panel discussion. I'm really happy to be part of this. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. And particularly thank you to Yusra, who's agreed to be part of this panel about an hour ago. So thank you for stepping in at the last minute. That's brilliant.
Nice.
Okay. So I thought I'd just start with a question before we open it up to the room of, I'd just like you to share really your experience of what you think the positives, but what you also think the challenges are of bioscience education, science communication, in your various local contexts. We've got, you know, a fantastic array of different settings. So, you know, what are the positives of teaching you in your context, but also what are the challenges that you think you've experienced? I don't know who wants to go first. Go. Oh, I can see all four of you. Brilliant. Helen, do you want to start? You're on mute.
May I?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, thank you. No, as I listened in the program yesterday, I couldn't help feeling that the challenges are actually universal. When you talk about different groups within the UK, they also exist within our countries, within our sub-regions, within our continent. So those socio-economic variables or divide you talked about, or we talked about yesterday, they exist in my country. In Nigeria, we have the socio-economic divide as well. You have people who we qualify now as white because they come from the upper class. They are able to live close to the university system or within, or they have cars with which they go to school. Then you have those who have to commute kilometers or live on the outskirts of the town to get to school. And the same variables and factors that undermine their maximum performance also exist here. Then you have other variables in terms of disabilities, for instance. In the UK, you are even lucky. You're talking about, you can get as far as the lab. In Nigeria, for instance, and Nigeria is one of the rich countries in West Africa and in Africa, I dare say, if you are disabled, you're on your own. You are on your own because there is no facilities, almost zero facilities for people who need access, say via ramp, to buildings, to classes, to labs, or people who are blind or visually impaired. It's only now in recent years that the story is beginning to change. My university, for example, is very proactive in trying to provide access and extra facilities, goes the extra mile for blind people, for instance, and By the way, we are a single mode, 100% open and distant learning. But if there are students who come to us, we make sure that the learner support services, is able to reach out to them and go the extra mile to help them with whatever disability they may be experiencing, which will impact on their ability to learn. And the one that has been established at NOUN, that's my university, is reaching out to people who are incarcerated. So the courses and the programs are brought to them there in prison so that they don't spend all their time just mourning their faith, and so that they are better prepared when they come out eventually to be in the, to integrate themselves into the general population and contribute to society as well. So in a nutshell, I see this as, it's a north-south issue. Within the UK, there are many variables, but in our own local communities, we also have similar problems. The variables may not be exactly the same. When I talk about socioeconomic challenges, in Nigeria, for example, I should use the word poverty because there is no middle class. You have the extreme rich, few of whom got the wealth legally, others through corruption. Then you have the very poor, most people living behind or beneath the poverty line. So when you put those people in the same system and trying to acquire an education, whether it's bioscience or any other education, the differentials are highly weighted against certain categories of people. So I feel that whatever lessons or takeaways we are removing from this discussion over to this will apply equally in our environment, wherever we are. And that, for me, that is the beauty. I've heard about decolonization before, diversification, but I had not realized the extent to which it's making a difference in the way we go forward with education in general. So I have a lot to feed forward back in my place. Thank you.
That's great. And I think that's a really important point to not assume that any group is a homogenous group, whether that's on nationality, ethnicity, disability. We have to reflect that individuality in all sorts of contexts and all of those intersecting factors as well. That's great. So either Shane or Maryam, do you want to share some of your experiences?
Yes. So I can.
Oh, sorry. We'll go Shane first and then Maryam.
Go first.
Yeah, I'll just share briefly. I think that Helen touched on one thing that immediately when you were talking about challenges, one thing that immediately came to mind was that point that she made about disability and persons with disabilities. I do think that there is scope for more work to be done in terms of inclusion of persons with disabilities. I think my university and my campus, we do make efforts to include persons who have disabilities, and we have had students graduate from our specifically bioscience programs with those degrees and then go on to pursue other disciplines. Namely, I'm thinking of one student who went on to pursue medicine. But I do think that there's still considerable work to be done there. And I think, every time, to come to your point, Catherine, every time a different member of that population identifies and says, well, I have a disability, it poses a different challenge to university. And I don't know that we'll always get it right 100% of the time, that we'll have a solution or an accommodation to every student who has a particular type of disability. But I do think that there's still considerable work to be done there. But in terms of, I think what presents itself also as a great opportunity in the biosciences, and then to move to that challenge very briefly, is given the particular geography of where I live, is living in one of the areas that's one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world, I do think that there's still a lot of scope for exploring indigenous cultures and how they've used the biodiversity. And I do think that the challenge that's associated with that is that sometimes we don't always include that in our education. Our education still tends to focus very narrowly on, I guess, for lack of a better word, the discoveries of a very small group of scientists who don't really reflect our region and don't really reflect the advances that were made in that particular area. So I do see that as a challenge, in that we're surrounded by this rich biodiversity. The students see it every day. They have questions about it, but the things that we are highlighting in the classroom and the discoveries that we're highlighting in the classroom are not necessarily related to that in at least our curriculum.
Thanks, Shane. Maryam.
Yes, so this conversation has somehow pushed me to think that we that there is room for reflection here for societies that have been colonized in the past and that are not more that are not anymore colonized, hopefully. How can we decolonize Africa, for example, African science, African science from within? And I was thinking, looking at teaching, for example, so many, at least the scientists, university staff I interacted with, they're very much keen to completely, I hate to use this word, but nearly copy whatever exists in Western universities and bring it over to Africa, because that's the standard, that's the best you can have. And I just think there is room here for unlocking, as I said, our way of thinking and doing business differently. For example, collaboration is one of the areas that has shocked me really when I worked in the last 3 years in Morocco and Ghana. So everyone is keen to have a collaboration with a European or North American university, not so much interested in South-South collaborations. This is something really difficult to achieve, and it's something that you very often hear about in every meeting you attend, that everyone is asking for South-South collaborations in Africa. I spent a month visiting 5 universities in Ghana, as I mentioned, and I met some extraordinary talented scientists in my field, plant health, plant pathology, also biodiversity. And we spent some time to exploring interaction links and writing concept notes. When I came back to Morocco, I spent many times organizing teams and Zoom meetings and fine-tuning those ideas and writing a research proposal, which we sent it over to universities, and that was basically the end of the story. So I spent the last 2 years sending many kind reminder emails that got no answer. So I think as scientists we can do our parts. And someone has mentioned today and yesterday the importance of including people from humanities, historians, I don't know, other disciplines, to try and perhaps contribute more, because think of this of this research project, and they would like to. They have their workload they have to address and deal with, and this needs a lot of work. And I just think there is room here for other stakeholders to come on board and participate to the conversation. I'd like to add so I mentioned collaboration. Academic freedom is something that is, to my experience, that needs more encouragement and more focus. You'd think bioscience doesn't need academic freedom, but to my experience, I mean, you'd think it should have academic freedom in bioscience. It should be granted, but it is not always the case. So this is something for also African scientists, educators, stakeholders to think about. So collaboration, academic freedom. I had something in mind which I had completely forgot. Yeah, this just means very, very, very quickly the endless list of barriers educators of bioscience have to deal with when it comes to acquisition of scientific equipment in Africa. So I'm not sure if our colleagues elsewhere know, but companies you order enzymes from, or primers, sequencing, consumables, equipment. Most of these companies do not have any representatives in Africa, in African countries. So, for example, kits and reagents that are routinely used in bioscience on the daily basis, so you can't find them in Africa. You have to import them from international suppliers, and usually you have to go through intermediate traders, and the cost is usually doubled or tripled. And then on the top of that, even if you have a very generous grant and can afford these costs, you have to deal with so many weeks of waiting, clearance, and having your kits or whatever reagents you have ordered being stored at inappropriate temperatures. So this is, I don't want to bother you with this or shift the discussion, but just to tell you that teaching bioscience in Africa is having so many barriers, so many factors interlinked, and making it really hard for both students and educators to achieve their goals. This means if you meet an African student or a scientist somewhere, I think they deserve a hand of collaboration and friendship, because if they got there, you should know that they've been fighting with so many obstacles and barriers. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting, Maryam. That must be such a barrier to doing even basic stuff. When you first told me that, I'd never thought about it, but what a challenge. Yusra, do you want to share any of your experiences teaching in Pakistan? What you thought the sort of opportunities and the challenges were in that context?
I think I'll just add to what the panel has already said about. I think starting with funding, which we say. Specifically, bioscience, I think, is a field which needs that physical access to equipment, chemicals, lab space, all the kind of things. And we can't, teaching bioscience, we can't be like, just focused on, probably with other disciplines, they need that kind of, but we need those lab-based equipments and stuff more, and that, I think, in countries like Pakistan, for example, I faced teaching students some of the aspects which we don't have the equipment. We just show them videos and we just show them, this is what this is what a machine looks like, this is what a spec looks like, this is one, or we have one in the country, or we have one in a city or something. So that's, we could do a field visit to that place, but we can't like probably have that much of access to that equipment which is probably available in UK. So definitely, as a researcher myself, I think if you want to do research-informed teaching, which is, of course, relevant to bioscience, it's very challenging in other countries like Pakistan to do that. The other aspect that Maryam has talked about, I would like to highlight, is also the impact of colonialism, which like, someone in Pakistan would not generally quote a Pakistani scientist or any scientist from the local, and they would quote a paper which is being published in the US or UK, and they would say that, this is what is, but I completely agree that but it's not a criteria that some good good research is carried out across the world, and that's what we need to highlight and acknowledge. So I think that is certainly another thing that is still, so decolonization is not a word, not a buzzword used, and everyone just kind of tries to work towards the Western standard of things and trying to get to that level of criteria. One last thing I think I faced when I moved from teaching as a lecturer myself to teaching here in UK was the lack of digital intervention. So we all know in the UK now we use a lot of Blackboard, virtual learning environments. We have a whole set of tools, especially after the pandemic. We have every university uses like maybe 10 or 12 common tools in their teaching, which is, if you go back to countries like Pakistan, they would have very few universities would have that access to digital interventions. Very few lecturers would be using those. So we are looking more on the traditional lecture-based format where the lecturer steps in and the students are making notes and stuff. So we're still talking about very conventional lecturing style. And so I think that is another challenge in teaching bioscience because it's a different format of teaching, still very traditional old age. We still haven't got to that digital age of teaching. So yeah, that's for me.
Brilliant. Such interesting perspectives in there. That's great. I think Maryam was going to say anything, and then we can open it up to the room. I'm sort of conscious that we want to have that input. Maryam, do you want to follow up on that?
Yes, actually, it's not a follow-up. Sorry, I just remembered something that because I'm running out of time, and I would say that I'll just invite everyone to seek the opportunity to move away when collaborating with African scientists or other scientists from the global south, to move away from asking them to collect samples. And not including them in any analytical work. I think this is just dominating everywhere. To my experience, what I've seen in the last 3 years, everyone's collecting samples, data, sending them over, and not knowing what's being done with it, or even how and the aim of it. I think it's really it's time we think about this. Sorry. Took 2 minutes.
Helen.
They have to collect samples because there is no equipment. What else will they do? And I'm bringing this up because we have our collaborators abroad. You come to the UK, they get new equipment. The old one is working. It's probably far newer than the one we have back home. And I've always wondered why, you ask, oh, please, can I have this piece of equipment? I will pay for the shipment. I will pay for the clearance, the custom and excise duties. I've done that a couple of times and I don't get anything. So if you want to do collaboration with me, it's likely that I will collect samples and send to you because there's nothing really in my lab to analyze, nothing is in quote, to analyze something that we publish in a high impact journal. So I want to use this opportunity to appeal to our colleagues in the more developed countries, or where the richer countries, where you tend to change your HPLC, your card, your reader, and all that, that there are people who can use those equipment that you are living for the newer models. And that is better for us to stay at home and help develop our students rather than have a tendency to emigrate to the more developed places, which is very frequent where I'm coming from. Having said that, I think we in Africa should also stop playing the victim game. When you talk about decolonization, we are thinking, oh, Nigeria is 62 years post-independence. 62 years post-independence. There is no reason why we should be where we are now, if not due to our own bad governance and corruption. So we also need to look inwards. The amount of resources that we have in my country, for example, I've had in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we could have done much better than where we are now. So one of the opportunities I think we can all go for is to let this conversation be open, be frank, be non-judgmental, and let's reach out to help each other. There is where there is a difference, people will hijack it and utilize it to their advantage. We have not said anything about gender, but that is where it actually starts from. So long as men and women are different, it will always work to the disadvantage of women, because that is how it is groomed by society, by religion, and by any other factors. So these are things we deliberately have to address to make sure that, the challenges, we see them in the right perspective as things that can be tackled and overcome. Maybe not all at once, but bit by bit we get there.
Thank you,
right
Helen.
now, we can only just collect samples, unfortunately.
Brilliant. Are there any questions from the room? I'm sort of conscious there's one over there. Just getting microphone. It'll be 2 seconds. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Salma. I've been really enjoying this discussion, and I just wanted to pick up on some of the points that Maryam and Helen were talking about. I think that one of the manifestations of colonialism that really concerns me today is neocolonial science or parachute science, where you've got researchers from highly resourced, usually Western countries, going to non-Western countries and using the resources, using the knowledge, going back, publishing a paper, and then not crediting the country that they collected data in. I think it was found 70% of Western researchers weren't putting their collaborators as co-authors. So I was just wondering if you had experienced that as a challenge, and if you have any sort of insights into how we can start preventing that practice from continuing. Thank you.
Did you hear that question? Did that get through?
Yes, would you like to take it, Helen?
No, collaborations have been what Maryam described and what my experience had been. So your addendum is, that's just how it is. However, I find that many scientists, bioscientists in Africa and in Nigeria, they like those collaborations because they tag along with the names of their counterparts from the North, which is publication and stuff like that. However, I think the time has come now where collaboration can be on a more even platform. For instance, my university and the University of Leeds, we are just developing a collaboration where our students will work with their students on capstone projects to address health and well-being issues, both in the UK and in Nigeria. And when I introduced this to my students, they were intimidated. They didn't want to have this contact with the UK students because they felt that they don't know enough, they wouldn't do well, and I had to take time to encourage them that is not true. I interact with scientists from outside. So I feel that if we, encourage, if we recognize our potential, we can pass that also to our students and make collaboration at a more even level. I prefer a situation where some equipment will be brought down to Africa. Equipment that you are looking to dispose of, but that they are still serviceable and useful. Bring it to Africa, let some of the work be done here. It will prevent the younger ones from angling to go to the West, to go to Europe, UK, USA, Australia, and all these other places. and it will keep the technology at home. Because if we have these facilities at home, the ability to pass it on to the next generation will be far more fruitful than just to have your name at the end or in the middle of a publication. I believe the people I've worked with outside the South, I think they've come to realize that we are not just takers. The potential of the human potential is huge. The intellectual potential is also huge. I'm sure those of you in the UK, you know that many Nigerians come to study postgraduate studies in the UK. Initially, they are intimidated. They've not been touched all this state-of-the-art equipment. They've only seen it in a picture, or their lecturer point to it, say you press this button. But give them 6 months. I know because I've taught for over 40. Give them 6 months, they catch up with their counterparts in the UK and many times overtake them and get the prizes for projects, for research, for this subject and for that subject. So I think we all need to understand that intellectually, it's not a case of being inferior. It's just that the facilities we've had at our disposal have not been encouraging. And we can help each other. I believe that is the purpose of the discourse. The decolonization can help each other to remove the inequalities and to provide the resources where it is needed, so that overall we can have a better scientific world and promote the subject of biology.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Shane, do you want to come in, Shane? You've got your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I think Helen has touched on quite a lot already, and I just wanted to add very briefly as it related to that question and comment made by the person in the audience. From my experience, I think with collaborations that I've had, what I have been able to do, though I've collaborated with persons, I guess, from more northern countries, Europe and North America, is I think also the searching for opportunities for your graduate students or your undergraduate students, seeing where your university perhaps could sign memoranda of understanding with those other universities to see if there's a possibility of collaborative exchange of undergraduates, but particularly for the graduate students, to come back to the point of what Helen was saying, to send someone somewhere else or to your collaborators' institution to perhaps be trained on the actual analysis, though you yourself may not be involved, maybe somebody on your team or somebody that you work with in your department. It helps to bring some of that knowledge back to your institution and cultivate a sense of institutional knowledge also in your geography where you are. And I think that that's quite useful as well. Sometimes if you want to leverage getting new pieces of equipment, whether that be from a collaborator or whether it's, in the one-off opportunity that the university can purchase it, you finally have an opportunity now for someone who has actually used this piece of equipment wherever the analysis was done to replicate that here in this environment in the Caribbean or Africa or wherever. So I do see that there is advantage to that, but I do very much agree that there needs to be an end brought just to kind of, as the person said, that kind of parachute science where they drop in, take something and, disappear. And the most somebody gets from it is just a name on an article, but no real knowledge is passed on. No real progress happens for persons in the region. One thing, maybe you will come to it, Catherine, but I thought there was also a rather insightful comment in the chat from Nicola about this idea of collaboration as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't seen what's in the chat. I'm multitasking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you take it, Shane. That's fine.
right. So the person said, just a comment, it's important to collaborate at the research conception stage too. And I'll just leave that phrase there because I thought that was a really important point. And that's why I wanted to flag it or just highlight that it was there, because collaborating at the conception stage is so important because people in the region know exactly what the problems are in the region. And if the collaboration starts at that conceptual basis of what the research question should be, the research is automatically, or hopefully will automatically be better tailored to the region rather than somebody just coming in with a preconceived notion or hypothesis about what the problems are and then trying to, tailor their research, which ultimately serves their own question and aims to the particular area. So I do think, collaboration at the inception stage of the actual research question is really, really important.
Brilliant. Any other questions in the room? Dave?
It's a comment really, and so it's Dave Lewis from University of Leeds, and I'm the one that Helen referred to earlier. I think, and really just building on what Helen said, that we actually need to break down those barriers much earlier. We have a lot of transnational education opportunities right from the start of the degree programs, where there's benefits for everybody. It's not a one-way street. It has to be mutual benefits, a collaborative partnership. But I think we need to, and they're very easy to do, they're cost-effective, etc. I think we need to bring more of those opportunities in across all our degree programs. So it's build that cultural awareness and capacity really.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, and I think that's really important. So I guess I'm just sort of, the time is going astonishingly quickly in this discussion. It's been really useful. So we've sort of thought about some things, but I guess my question is a forward-facing question of, where do we move on? How do we create this much more collaborative sense? Both we've talked sort of things that practical things at a research level, but maybe thinking about an education and an outreach level. What do you think is the way forward? How do we build it? Because I was very conscious of trying to put this plan all together as I thought I was reasonably well connected, but then I thought about who I knew and my own connections I realised were not nearly as global as they should have been. So I was wondering what you thought we could do positively as a community to start to get this much more global perspective on what we're doing to the benefit of students in the UK and your students, and how do we create something really positive going forward?
I'll just jump in with a brief comment first, because I think it's something that I believe, I don't remember who made the comment, so let me not say, but I thought the point of the South-South collaborations was really important. And I think also encouraging our own students within, I think, these previously colonized spaces to value South-South collaborations and see the value in gaining research expertise in some place that not only is geographically similar, but also perhaps is similar historically in terms of the way that the universities are structured, the way that the science has been done and things like that. But additionally, another thing that I think is really important is also getting our students and creating a value system for students to appreciate that science is done by persons who look other than people in the textbooks or who look other than people that they might see traditionally. I think at this stage, at least I could say all of my students are clear in their understanding that scientists can look like them, but I don't think sometimes we really engage in discussions to really help them come up with an appreciation of that. So we don't really help them engage in discussions about, so this particular discovery was made, it was made by X group of people, but despite the advantages for this particular technology affecting people in the developed world, the South, however you want to phrase it, this technology has the potential to affect these people the most, yet these are not the people doing the majority of the research on it. Or when you look at the people who are doing the research on it, you'd recognize that there's not a lot of diversity. Like you realize, well, maybe only 30% of the authors are women. And then if you look in the last author and first author positions, that dwindles down to 5%. So I think it kind of just including in our activities, in our instructional activities, a brief discussion on that sometimes, just a very brief look on that, you'd be surprised how much that can create an attitudinal change in students as to, their ability to create capital for them to realize, look, I can aspire to that. That's a challenge. That's something that we're not meeting. And maybe that's one of the areas that I could be involved in. A really good example of that, I think, is CRISPR-Cas9. I always use that example in one of my biotechnology courses. I point out the technology, I point out how it's being used, and then I point out, there's a great inequity in terms of its usage and how it's used. And I think when you do that, students are really always surprised and they become very passionate about it.
Thank you, Shane. Anyone else want to come in? Yusra, you haven't?
Yes.
Oh, Maryam, go for it.
You can go, Yusra.
Okay, it's okay. You can go ahead first.
It's really, I totally agree with Shane. It's really important to invite students to first just allow conversation to take place, really, and let them think of all these ideas we've been talking in the last couple of days. But I just want to stress the importance of perhaps inviting other stakeholders to come on board, because in the absence of this baseline level of infrastructure, it'd be just impossible for Southern students, African students, developing students from developing countries to catch up in the pace. We Helen spoke about 6 months, but I'm afraid it's really more than that, you just can't learn bioscience while reading articles. You need to have a lab and do experiments. But as I said, as scientists, at least based on my own experience, we have spent lots of time writing, conceptualizing, and working the full economic cost and everything, but still it didn't go through the top managers of the universities. And I think these other stakeholders can make a difference if they take part in the conversation.
Thank you, Maryam. You also have Helen or Yusra?
Hi, I would just like to just add on to the points of what Shane and Maryam have been saying about basically having that understanding of what are the differences, and then as someone said yesterday, that there are not many differences. It's all about unity as well. So there are very common themes that we're all doing, whether we're doing across the globe. We are all teaching bioscience, so we need to consider like the commonalities as well. But I think specifically focusing on the theme of the symposium, decolonization, I think because we just had in this panel discussion, what I took is that there is a different concept of decolonization, probably in countries like Pakistan and Africa and stuff, compared to what we're talking about in UK when we talk about decolonization. So I think we need to consider the term decolonization in that region, in that aspect, and we need to have that open dialogue very regionally as well, kind of in our communities, stir that conversation up and say, how can we bring decolonization to, for example, Pakistani bioscience or African bioscience or Ghana bioscience or Moroccan bioscience, whatever. So I think those kind of conversations would definitely be helpful. But for those now considering the other side of people who are based in UK like myself, who want to do something about decolonization, I think the main reason why the UK academics are now concerned about decolonization is we want to understand the global perspectives so that we can cater to the international students who are coming up to UK, so that we can understand their background. So again, going back to my talk yesterday where I said different cultural backgrounds. So all the challenges that we have just indicated. So the person who is coming in, like I felt that, again, my roots are a bit different, but someone coming directly from Pakistan would not have access to like science museums or that kind of science exposure early in their very early life. And they generally, when they step into university, is probably the first time they taken up with a lot of information that they have to digest, compared to probably people who live on more economically developed countries where they have that input from a very early stage. So I think we need to kind of understand that cultural and backgrounds and differences and cater to our students accordingly.
Brilliant. Helen, would you like to close with your thoughts, please?
Thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I think we have some work to do within, even as we take a step forward. Listening yesterday, I believe that we have various and different understanding about the basic concepts. Some people were saying that decolonization is approximately to diversification. Others were saying diversification was a subset. Others, decolonization was a subset. Others that they are not even related. I think we need to have to be on the same page, have the same understanding, and then let this not just end as an academic exercise. After the workshop done, I've organized a successful workshop and we've had such and such comments. Let's look about the post-workshop activity that we can put in place. In the communique, whether it's published or not, what are the core areas where we can make a difference within the UK or between the UK and some of these other geographical entities that are represented here? It doesn't have to be big. One small change, we are all biologists. We understand the term catalyst, right? And one small change can trigger off a big change. Personally, I'm going to take this concept back home. It's not the first time I've come across it, but I've never really interrogated it the way that I have seen here now. And I'm just imagining that, oh, even our curriculum back home, we review curriculum that from time to time, but these are areas we can look at. I had one other last slide to do, but I'll skip it. Produced in 2001, when access to computer clip arts was not as versatile as it is now. In fact, I used a program called Instant Artist. And it was an art exhibition. So I just pulled a number of things together and then created some de novo. And the outcome, you would think I use all white women, even the scientist and the medical doctor are white, because that was what was available. But if I were to do such a thing today, I will do something different. I don't normally bring out a yellow hand. I bring a dark one like Austin did, right? To reflect my color, my complexion. So we need to be respectful of each other, where we are coming from. We should not be judgmental, and we should not have any colonial mentality, whether it's a superior one or an inferior one, because of a truth, the real science doesn't know those things. It's we bringing on our human perspectives and interpretation that color it and make it more difficult for us to progress forward. So I would like to challenge Catherine and her group and all of us who are here that something should happen beyond this. And it is our responsibility to determine what that something is. And it doesn't have to be big. We can start small, because little by little, we make it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for that. So I'm so grateful to our panel. That was such an interesting discussion. I think that's really given us a lot of food for thought. I think there'll be some very active conversations over lunch here. But I absolutely agree with you, Helen, in terms of, and in fact, the theme for this afternoon is going to be taking action moving forward. So we have some more talks, but we are going to have a workshop. Can I just flick to my slides, Simon? So we'll discuss these questions later this afternoon. But what I'm really hoping that we can do is we're trying to kickstart a conversation here and bring people together. This is so important. We've had such rich discussions we need to start thinking about here. So I'm going to leave these questions there for you, but we will discuss these questions later, but maybe have a little perusal over them over lunch. So what have you personally learned for this conference? What actions are you personally going to take away from this conference? But also, as a community, how can we make some positive change in this spirit? We've had this group of people together. How can we build some momentum on that? How can we capture what's happened in this, take it further, and address some of the challenges that we've talked about over the last couple of days? So we'll come back together and talk about these issues and what we want to do as a community this afternoon. So it's now lunchtime. So we have 3 courses now for lunch, which is great. Just an administrative thing. We know a lot of you are wanting to get taxis down to the station at the end of the meeting, so we thought we'd be sensible and do some taxi sharing rather than everyone booking taxis individually. So if you'd like to do a taxi share, if you can just come to the whiteboard and pop what time you want a taxi for, then the SEB team will coordinate taxi bookings there. Just save a bit of petrol, and that's fine. So thank you so much to all of our global panel discussions. It was a really valuable addition to the programme. So thank you very much for that participation. Thank you very much, everybody.